Welcome. This is the BackendBear Podcast, where we discuss anything related to programming, algorithms, and the latest practices in the coding world. So sit back, grab a drink, enjoy it, and let's dig right into it. How's it going, people? Hope you're having a great start of the week. You're programming hard, you're solving those problems, and you can't wait for Friday to come in. Well, this week I had Zac Brady on the show, and he's all the way from Nottingham, UK, or England. And Zac Brady is a full-stack developer and Koodoo. And pay attention to how I pronounce Koodoo, because I've been pronouncing it wrong the entire show, and luckily Zac corrected me, but I couldn't get it out of my mind for some reason. Zac Brady is one of the louder voices in the community, and one of his last talks were titled All the Mistakes I Made Trying to Implement Microservices, which I thought really interesting because I'm dealing with microservices a lot, and I know I'm making mistakes, and I wanted to learn more from it, so I wanted to pick his brain. And thankfully he accepted, and we talked a lot about some of the problems you might face when architecting a system with a lot of microservices in it, or even mistakes that you can make in those kinds of systems. Additionally, we touched a bit on, your team mechanics and, clean code, the usual in chemistry. And also be ready for my performance at the beginning of the show. Purposely, I left it like that. I didn't want to re-record. I want to keep it raw and innocent as possible. So just let me know how bad I am. But it was funny and I liked it. Hope you guys enjoyed it as well. And without further ado, thank you, Zac, for being a guest on the show. And let's dig right into it. Heads up. I embarrass myself in the beginning of every episode. So just hang in there. Let me put it like that, okay?
The tension is palpable.
So, okay. Today's gonna be the day Zac Brady's on the show. By now you should somehow hear one of his talks. I don't believe that anybody feels the way he does microservices. Brady is the main lead, he's a full-stack at dev Koodoo. If people want to say more on your mortgage, then without a doubt, use Koodoo as a digital platform. It'll make them feel so good about you now.
Wow, man. I've been Wonderwalled. That's amazing. Zac Brady, if he was Wonderwall, that's amazing. Thank you so much. I'm going to have to call my mum after this and let her know that this episode's coming out. It's like, I've made it, like I'm a song. That's great, man.
Thank you. I mean, I think this is the stupidest thing I've done so far, but I'm glad you like it. It's like,
hey, man. I mean, that's amazing. It's wicked creative. I love it. That's great.
I'll give you the lyrics later so you can practice it.
Yeah. Like I'll probably frame the lyrics or something. Like put it up in the bedroom or something. That's fantastic.
Yeah, but back to the topic. So welcome, guys. So this is the BackendBear Podcast, and today I have with me Zac Brady, all the way from the UK, and he's if you haven't heard in the beautiful lyrics, he's a full-stack dev at Koodoo. He is passionate for microservices, and today we're going to talk a bit about that. And Zac, you've been in this industry for what, like 5-6 years? For quite a while, right?
Yeah, I a little while, yeah, five or 6 years. It's I feel like I've been sort of spending a lot of time trying to convince people that I know what I'm talking about in that, in that time, and no one's guessed that I that I'm just trying things out thus far. But yeah, it's that's about the length of the experience there. Yeah.
So, you're at Koodoo. So, what do you do there? What do you guys do? What's your mission?
Okay, so yeah, Koodoo. Well, I've followed along with you. It's Koodoo. Is it's a digital, as you say, a digital mortgage platform. And look, in a sentence, what we're trying to do is help people save money on their mortgages. And the way in which we do that is that we have aggregators on one end of our platform, and aggregators are places I guess I'm going to say UK examples, so it might not land with your audience, but we got like Compare the Market, Money Supermarket. These are places where you can go and compare different mortgage deals, or wider financial deals like loans and credit cards and stuff like that as well. And then so we've got them on one end of our platform. On the other end of our platform, we have banks, lenders, your traditional, people with money who are willing to lend it. And we try to sit there in the middle. Now, traditionally, a mortgage broker might sit in that position where they have lots of sort of connections and so forth, and they go out and negotiate the best deal for you. And we're trying to make that a little bit more digital, a little bit quicker. And in our latest iterations of the software, we've been able to make it such that you can do some of the simpler things that you do in mortgages, but would otherwise take weeks, maybe even months, and we do them very, very quickly. We're talking in a matter of days. By the time the conversations have gone backwards and forwards between the lender and the person trying to find the mortgage and so forth. So yeah, we it's pretty fulfilling work, to think that my job is to try and make people's lives a little bit easier.
Mhm. You're kind of in a similar boat I am. I mean, we're also, I'm also in the financial industry, but we're like more creating solutions that kind of connect different vendors and banks. So I don't have that people connection. So we're mostly
Mm-hmm.
banks and vendors. But yeah, I know it's a bit cutthroat out there. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I like it a lot. So what is the kind of the technology stack you guys are working with?
So, in the intro, you introduced me as a full stack developer, and that's true. I do have a fair bit of experience on the front end, but whilst I've been working with Koodoo, we have been building an entirely API based applications. It's all back end, um, and we've done that with Node, and we're building in a microservices framework. Uh, it's all hosted in the cloud via Google Cloud Platform, in a Kubernetes cluster, and we use a particular framework called Molecular, which is a framework that helps you to be able to easily build, robust microservices. So yeah.
Sounds pretty interesting. Um,
Mm.
so it's a smaller team, I assume. So the way you guys are kind of structured, more of a like startup type of feel.
Yes, yeah. So we are a very small team. So there's 4 developers. There's me and one other lead, and 2 junior developers, as well as a small QA team, a small product team, and then a couple of C titles, totaling in about sort of I think we're 13 people, and we're spread across Nottingham in England, and London as well.
So, do you guys practice like code ethics, and do you guys do code reviews? Is clean code part of the thing or not?
Yeah, well, yeah, we definitely practice clean code, and
I didn't mean
we
it in
spend
a
a lot.
bad way. Sorry to interrupt. I didn't mean it in a bad way, but it's just some companies just like go you know head first and then let's develop it and then we'll clean up later. But some companies just like to do it clean from the start, right? And have like a structure, like here are the code ethics and here's how we do code reviews and so on and so forth.
Well, so there's some really interesting subtleties in what you've just said there. So it's I don't think that you need to throw away clean code principles in order to be able to go fast. But I do get the distinction that you're making. The fact that some people prefer to go fast and some people prefer to take a more cautious and trying to think about every eventuality sort of approach. And I think there's ups and downs to both ways of doing that. I guess to answer your question directly, how do we do it at Kudu? It's somewhat of sort of like a hybrid approach, I guess. We try our best to be able to make pragmatic decisions around what we can do with the finite resource that we have, and with a small team, it feels ever so more finite, that resource. So we really have to make sure that we're always focusing on the thing that's going to give us the most value as quickly as possible. In terms of how we do that, we do code reviews. We spend a lot of time talking about different ways of approaching problems. Um, we have architecture meetings with me and the other lead where we talk about um, different levels of problem solving in terms of how do we solve a problem perfectly, and then we try and like wind that back and kind of be like, okay, well, that's how we would solve the problem if we had infinite money and resource and time. That's how we would solve that problem. Well, now how do we bring that back to reality, and what parts do we take off, and what corners do we cut in such a way that it doesn't ruin the original idea, but it means that we are taking a step towards it, and still able to deliver on time as well. So, um, as I say, it is somewhat of a complicated answer because we still move fast, but we also have clean code and good architecture principles in mind whilst we do it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a difference. How should I put it? I used a good example, for example, with a writer. Imagine a writer writing a book, right? So two writers are writing the same book. You give them the same topic.
Hmm.
So the plot twists are the same, the characters are the same, so all of that is the same. The way they would write the book is different in a way.
Hmm.
So they have different
Hmm.
metaphors, the way they express themselves, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of what I
Hmm.
was kind of going for more in a way that
Hmm.
I don't know. I have a certain way of naming variables. You have a different way of naming variables, right? So it's that kind of way. So, but I see your point, and what I would like to also touch upon is deciding, talking about architecture and kind of seeing like, okay, if we have infinite amount of money, we can do it like this, and then what can we really do? What is the real situation? I really like that approach and kind of a little light bulb bar activated in my head because it's kind of the issue I'm running into now in my company. So we're kind of
Hmm.
making some architecture decisions and where I need to make some decisions, but I have something else on my hand, so I cannot throw this away and then start all over. But I have to save whatever I can and make the best out of it. So that's a really good and healthy approach, I have to say. So you got.
Yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
sorry, I think we found that to be a really useful approach that we've had, and that's shown its colors recently. Recently we had quite a tight deadline that we had to get towards, and as part of that, we had to probably cut more corners than we would have liked to have. But with having that ideal solution in mind, it really helped us to be able to know which corners we could cut safely and remain on target towards the ideal solution that we wanted, and which ones were going to divert us, down a completely different track that we weren't going to be able to come back from. And as a result, at the end of our, once we actually released, we've got happy customers. We were able to go back and say, okay, well now, as part of the next release, we're going to be able to cover off those corners, and we know that we're heading back towards the direction that we wanted and everything. Because I think that quite a lot of tech debt that that companies take on remains tech debt forever and after. And by being able to frame everything under this, this perfect solution, if we had all this time and money, it means that what you've effectively done is made a long-term plan that you can then keep on checking yourself back into, and kind of like, oh, was that is that still the case? Do we need to modify that that ideal solution, or are we still on track with paying back that tech debt that we've taken on?
Yeah, I'm in a company that's like 25 years in the making, and I know my listeners already know that I'm like a parrot repeating that every episode.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we kind of immersed a lot of tech debt, throughout the years.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's 25 years, so it's kind of there are a lot of solutions like floating in, flying in, and now we're kind of paying the price, but we still have deadlines to deal with. So it's always like a compromise, and
it's hard, man.
Yeah, it is. I mean, but that's why not a lot of people do this. Like, on the top, it's just a lot of paperwork and a lot of documentation, a lot of stuff to deal with. But do you guys? How do you? I mean, because it's a tight deadline and everything is tight. How do you guys deal with "quote unquote" bad code? And I don't mean like, oh my god, bad code. It's just sometimes that kind of is not not up to standards. Let me put it like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, in a microservices architecture, you really get to lean into some of the benefits of the way that you build software, in the sense that bad code exists in our software, and again, I'm using bad code in the same way as you are. It's not implicit. Yeah, it's not implicitly bad. It's not implicitly bad. Certainly, it was built right to begin with. But now our thinking has evolved, and the way that we build our services have evolved in such a way that now it doesn't seem to fit. I guess it's not bad so much as it just doesn't conform to our new standards. In any case, we have that in our system. But being a microservices architecture, a lot of that just kind of goes away, because when you go to change a service, if you see something bad like that, then there's not really much point in trying to fix it. You might as well just make another service, because all our services are, we're talking about in terms of, so the services themselves have quite a number of lines of code in them, but a lot of that is sort of boilerplate framework sort of code, and the logic that actually the service is actually not all that much. We're talking about some of our more complicated services have less than 1,000 lines of code in them. So you just rewrite the service. So that's how we manage bad code. Now, in microservices, again, it's a different paradigm. You more often have bad architecture than you have bad services.
That was my next point, but yeah.
Yeah. Bad. More often than bad code, you see bad architecture. And I say bad architecture. I mean, I'm the one doing the architecture, right? So I feel like I can reserve the right to say that. But again, it's not necessarily bad so much as it's just that our understanding of how we want to build the software within our chosen domain, how that thinking has evolved, and it's not that hard to fix. Like you just need to rethink the connections between your services and how they talk to each other. And a lot of the work that I do in refactoring our architecture comes down to okay, now we have a better understanding of our domain, so we know that these services deserve to be in their own bounded context off to the side, and so we're going to make changes to the architecture to be able to do that. So it's a bit sort of Uncle Bob, leaving the campsite better than you found it, sort of refactoring.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm such a fangirl for Uncle Bob. I love the guy, but I mean, I was so inspired by his books that it's not even funny. So,
have you read the new one, the Clean Architecture?
Yes, I read the Clean Architecture, Clean Code, and I have one more left. It's the Clean Code there. So
Clean Coder. Yeah,
I have to read
that. That's like
one.
the soft skills one.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
And but I was inspired. I mean, the first job I ever worked at, like the first day they gave me like, here, read this book cover to cover, and then you can check in code. And I'm like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
So, but
good first job.
Yeah, and that's how I learned. Like, and so yeah, let's just, for those people who don't know, can you explain what a microservice is? Just for the first time, like hearing us talk about it.
Oh, that's a very hard question because it means so many different things to so many different people. Let me try and explain it in terms of the chronology of how microservices came to be. So the way that we have developed software for quite some time now has been what has now been retermed as a monolith, right? And originally it was called N-tier architecture, which is the idea being that you build an application, but you don't just build one single sort of thing that everything can talk to everything. You've got different tiers. So you've got a front end tier. You might have a services tier, a business logic tier, and a database tier, and each tier sits next to each other and only talks to the tier that's next to it. That you stack them all on top of each other in a diagram, and so forth. And what this related to in quite a number of architectures was that you actually didn't have all that many tiers. You just basically had a front end, a business logic, and a data layer. And the thing about that was the thing that people thought was really good about that was that you could. The theory is that you would just rip out a whole tier, right? You could rip out your whole front end and then put a whole new front end on the front, because the only coupling was between the front end and the business layer, and the data layer didn't care about the front end. You could easily do that, right? But time told us that was a lie. That it actually wasn't all that easy to be able to rip out those tiers. And actually, it was a terrifying ordeal to try and say, "Oh, I'm going to go from ASP Classic to React or something like that." And so to try and help abstract that difficulty away and make more layers in the software architecture, principles of SOA, or a service-oriented architecture, came about, and that was more of a back-end principle. But the idea is that you would split your what used to be a single massive business layer and data layer. You'd split all them out into smaller services, but they'd still be they would still look after quite a lot of the application, but they'd be a little bit smaller. And over time, that that seemed like a good choice. And as time went on, people thought, well, why don't we make it smaller? Why don't we make it smaller? And where we've gotten now is that with the microservices architecture is that we've essentially continued to break that down to the point where, depending on who you're talking to, there's a lot of different definitions for a microservice. One of them is that a microservice should only have at most 100 lines of code, and that would seem to be a fairly extreme example.
That's the first time I hear that
but
one, but yeah, okay.
yeah, so I mean that's not one that we subscribe to at Koodoo. We do have bigger services than that, but the crux of it is that you should be breaking everything down to single responsibilities at an extreme. And so if you were to look at our architecture diagram at Koodoo, we actually don't have one that covers our entire architecture, because there would be no point. It would be too difficult to understand. But we do have architecture diagrams for different flows within our system. And with those, like a single operation could, have anywhere up to sort of 15, 20, 25 services that all interact with each other in order to be able to fulfill a single operation. So I feel like I've been talking for a really long time, but that's the definition of microservices. There you go.
Yeah, I'll chime in. My definition is basically a self-contained application. So it's an application running on its own, has its own database, but it's kind of part of the architecture. And in a way that you kind of described it, diagramming all that, because diagrams are the key basically to microservices. At least that helps me with my architecture with microservices, that I start big and then so I have a bunch of diagrams for the system. And then every node is basically another diagram and another diagram and another diagram. And that's how I kind of explain the microservices. So I go as deep as I need to go or not need to go. Right. But, so sorry about that. But that's pretty much my kind of definition. It's kind of self-contained application running on its own. So it's like you have, for example, let's say you're doing hotels, right? So you create one service for searching hotels, getting those hotels, and then you create another service which is the basket for when you add those hotels in the basket, and then basket calculates the price, and then you get charged in the end by that. So you have two services running, one which is kind of dealing with fetching the data, searching and all that jazz, and the other deals with finances, right? So
that's certainly one way to build a microservices system, and it kind of hits on something that maybe we'll talk about later, in the sense that there isn't really a right answer to how to build microservices or how to define microservices as it stands. The whole concept and practice is less than 10 years old in terms of it having been sort of announced and people started thinking about. Obviously, places like Google and all that kind of stuff have been doing it for much longer, but in terms of microservices in the public lexicon, it really hasn't been a long time. So not a lot of people have strong answers. So whilst you say, I might build something that's a basket service, and I might build something that's an order service and stuff like that. In terms of how we work at Koodoo, we actually approach it in a very different way. We start by talking about, okay, what does the system need to do in order to be able to interact with itself? Like, does it need to so we actually start with messages, in terms of what messages would we need to send in order for the different microservices that we're planning on having in the system to be able to do anything. And this is before we even know what services we're going to build. And this is a way of building the architecture that we picked up from a book called The Tao of Microservices by Richard Rogers. which if you're thinking about doing microservices, I highly recommend picking up that book and reading it cover to cover, because it's got some amazing stuff in it. But in any case, he suggests that you start with messages. And by doing that, what we end up finding is that when we go to build a new piece of functionality within our system, we actually start with very, very tiny services. So when you're saying, I would build a basket microservice, I would say that we would build like an add to basket microservice. We would have a remove from basket microservice sort of thing. Like it's like really tiny sort of stuff.
So also makes me think, have you heard about the micro front ends?
I have to admit that I haven't done too much research into it, but I'm Twitter aware of it.
Yeah, same here. I was just looking at it, and kind of that even confused me even more, because it's kind of, no, I don't know. I just, my understanding and grasping of it for now, it's not yet okay, and I'm interested to figure out about that a bit more. But for now, to me, it doesn't make any sense. But we'll see.
Yeah, well, I mean, like I've the microservices systems I have built thus far have all had monolithic front ends. But the right now at Koodoo we don't have a front end to speak of. I haven't really had the opportunity to look into micro front ends professionally, so I wouldn't really have a comment.
Yeah. Okay. I was just curious.
Yeah.
So, are you guys like do you guys have like a more of an agile development, like agile DevOps, or do you guys more approach like a waterfall? We need to do this, and then we have a certain. I mean, everyone has a deadline, so we need to do something by this time. So, how do you organize work?
We try our best to use tools as tools and not have them, sort of be our masters, if you will. So we do stand-ups every morning, and we have sprint plannings and so forth. We don't so much have a backlog to speak of. We also have a Kanban board to do our individual tasks, but essentially what we've done is we've taken all the things that we have found to be useful, and used them, and all the things that we find are not useful and a waste of time, we don't use. And I think from team to team, like if what you're looking for is my advice on how the best way that those things should be structured, then my advice would be those things are going to change from team to team and domain to domain. And, what you really need to do is spend time experimenting and finding what works best for our team. How do we best deliver the solutions that we need to? Because in some ways in sometimes we are very plan light, and we just sort of like, what's the next most important thing to do, and we do that. And then in other times we need to be a little bit more rigorous in our planning, and to make sure that we hit deadlines and so forth. And then we're talking about full scale project planning. But we're pretty. I guess we've got agile methodologies, if you will.
Yeah, it sounds like kind of what we do in my company. It's you basically assess and kind of figure out what you need, depending on what the project is. So if you know the requirements, if you know exactly what needs to be done, then yeah, I can do it agile. If I need to do it like I don't even know what I'm building at the moment, I'm just going to stick it on the wall, then probably, more of a DevOpsy way and stuff like that. So it depends. So it's like a tool. I mean, and it should be used like a tool, depending on what your project is and how you scope it and stuff like that. So teams should not be afraid. Teams should not be stuck on like one type of, how do you call it? Organization? Not an organization, but one type of planning methodology. So they should kind of, pick and choose, like whatever, like you said, you recognize the good stuff and you just utilize that. So by that you mean what was useful for that particular project. For the next project, some stuff might not work, something else might work, and so on and so forth. So it's always a game you have to play. So one of the things that I kind of with microservices, that kind of run into trouble is that I go too micro in a way. So, and that's the complaint I get mostly because we kind of do hostings on AWS, and then all of a sudden they have 5 databases running and 15 microservices around and stuff like that. And, they're freaking out a bit because of that. But then I try to explain that either I need it or then I need to, am I going too small? Is that one of the pitfalls with microservice methodologies, going way too small?
When TDD first started, taking a real hold on the developer community, and people started realizing that was a good thing. But before, everyone had a chance to realize that was a really sort of important practice. One of the criticisms that came up with that was that, but if I have to make everything testable, then what ends up happening is I have to split things out from my code so that I can mock it out, rather than just having everything being newed up and all that kind of stuff within my classes. And so the criticism was, oh, now I'm having class explosions, was what people said. Time has shown that TDD is a good practice, and I think what we're seeing here is with people saying that microservices, they make my code too small, is a very similar scenario. So there was a developer I was actually speaking with at a meetup a couple of days ago, and he was talking about how his company had taken on quite a lot of tech debt, and his managers were just continuing to rush forward and so forth. And I said to him, well, how are you planning on managing that? You can't just let tech debt go on forever. So, how are you going to pay back the tech debt? And what he said was, I'm just going to, I'm trying to convince my managers to let me do a complete rewrite of the system. And I said, mate, it's never going to happen. Coming back to Uncle Bob, he calls that the great rewrite in the sky. It's just not going to happen, right? And it's not the best thing to do either. Why go dark all that time? It doesn't make sense. And he said, well, how do you deal with it? And I said, well, the thing is that because all my microservices are so small, and I showed him an architecture diagram on my phone, just at a high level. I didn't want to give away our company secrets, but enough to be able to show, the way, how many services we were talking about and the different connections that were made. And I said, see that? And he said, yeah, it looks really complicated. And I said, well, it kind of is. But what you're actually looking at there is, each of those services has simple code written within it. And the complexity is really in the architecture and the way that the services interact with each other. But what that means is that if I decide that I can find, I guess we were talking about this earlier, right, with the bad code. Like if I find that there's something that's not quite right, then I'll just rewrite it. And so as a result, really what I'm doing is I'm rewriting the whole system constantly. Like I said, I'm constantly painting the same wall just over and over again. You know what I mean?
Wow. Oh, okay. My mind is blown in a way. The reason for it is because, I don't know, just talking to you, it kind of, again, a light bulb just flashed in my head. It's like, so in our situation, we have this third-party solution or program that kind of locks us in a certain way, right? So we cannot rewrite the entire system. So we're right in that spot. It's too much money. I cannot rewrite from the start. That's entire like a CRM solution and stuff like that. So it will take too much big toll on the team. And what we started doing is kind of creating microservices that work with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what I wasn't thinking is that, yes, if I made them even smaller, because before I was worried, like, hey, I'm writing these microservices, but if that system is gone, the third party system, they give up on it or something changes, then I'm screwed. Then I'm left with these microservices that kind of don't do anything. But I think you brought up a great point, because now I can minimize those as much as possible. So, and then even if that system is gone later, then like Legos, I can just regroup them in some way and then, get a usable system out of it. And I think that's great.
And if you've broken it down into such a way that it is like you've got all these operations that are on the periphery of actually needing to speak with your third party service, and you've got one service that is responsible for talking to that third party service, then ultimately you aren't tied to that third party service at all. If there's another service that does the same, a similar sort of thing, that is half the price, or or does things better, then all you need to do is rewrite that one service that talks to that to that third party service, and make sure that it spits back out the same shape data to its upstream services, and then you're fine.
Yeah, that's great advice. I have to say that it is great advice. It can open my eyes, right? So, and I'm really, really happy for it. So, what are the problems you had or mistakes you made? Can you share that with us a bit in your architectures? Or
the list is long.
Okay, best stuff.
one of the things that we've already sort of touched on is the fact that microservices is a really new architecture. In the grand scheme, I mean, software development is new in the grand scheme of humanity, and microservices is even newer than that. And so there is, and also we're entering a different age of microservices, because we've basically, as a development community over the last sort of 5, 6, 7 years, we have been begging our the pointy head bosses of the world, please let us do microservices because it's the best thing that we could do. And it's only been in the last sort of couple of years that a lot of bosses in mid-level companies and startups, and someone who isn't Netflix basically has started saying, yeah, okay, we're going to do microservices too. And now, as a software development community, we're all turning around and going, oh crap, how do we actually do this now? And more importantly, how do we do it without the godlike resources of Netflix and Amazon and all that kind of stuff? Because a lot of the microservices, like talks that you see on YouTube and the blogs and all that kind of stuff, they are from these big guys, and they are full of wisdom, and they're worth listening to. But personally, I wasn't able to translate that to something that is affordable and doable on a much smaller scale until the past year or so. So a lot of the mistakes that I've made have been just learning experiences in that sort of way.
Yeah, let me interrupt. I mean, a lot of big companies, and what I see like these days is that a lot of people get caught up on the latest and greatest architectures, technologies, and stuff like that, and they're looking at the big companies and like how they do it, right? So, oh my God, Google did this, or oh my God, Facebook did that. That's all good. But they have to realize, and that Uncle Bob, I think, taught me that. I think it's in the Clean Architecture book somewhere. But anyway, it's like, yes, all those tools are third-party tools are great, but they are there to solve a problem. And they were developed because they solved a problem for them, right? So example would be like React.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take. So developed by Facebook. So it was a side project, right? So they worked on it, not side project, but they were trying to solve their internal problem, and then they realized, oh, okay, we can open source this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then a lot of people jumped in on board and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, but still, the architecture and the way it was designed was to solve that particular problem. So it might not be your problem, if you know what I'm saying now.
Mm-hmm.
So it might solve some of your problems, but some of them it might not. So don't get stuck up on the technologies and don't, accept everything they say like 100%. You always have to have that a bit of, skeptical mind in those things. Like you gotta look at from your perspective. Does it solve my problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what kind of brings me back in the microservices. What we talked just a bit about. The problem I was having that I just realized that I'm having is that even though, yes, I'm building some microservices doing something, but I'm still kind of, the way I build them, I'm kind of locking myself into an architecture, which I shouldn't. Not an architecture. I'm locking myself into a third-party solution, which I shouldn't, right? Those microservices should be independent on their own and do their own thing, and altogether they should solve that problem that that third-party solution has.
Mm-hmm. So let me interview you for a second. So how would you split that? Like, how do you solve that problem?
Well, now that I know what the problem is, it's easier kind of to sit back and look at the big picture, right? So now I see the bigger picture. I was kind of my focus was too narrow at the time when I was designing. I was too concentrated on what the application or third-party thing was doing instead of looking at the big picture, right?
Yeah, and that's a really important thing as well, is because I've said this quite a lot to my colleagues. They're probably sick of hearing me saying it, but with a microservices architecture, you make the code that's in individual services very simple. It's not a lot of code, and someone could easily understand what an entire service does. At least this is how we do it at Koodoo. Is you could understand what an entire service does easily within 20 minutes at the most. But and that's a really great benefit that we buy from being able to from building microservices, because we bring on a new person and we say, hey, there's a bug in this individual service, can you go look at it? And they'll have it done. They'll be pushing code out to production within within the first half a day of them being with us at Koodoo, and that's awesome. But that complexity of the code that you might otherwise have in a monolithic architecture, that doesn't just go away. It gets shifted. So we're now no longer looking at complexity within the code. That complexity now gets shifted up to the architecture. And so when you're saying, you got to think about things a little bit differently. What this means is that DevOps and solid QA processes and monitoring and controls in terms of how do I know that something is operating the way that I expect it to operate? All this is super important. Like, you can't do without it in a truly sort of microservices environment, because you're dealing with the fallacies of distributed computing. You're dealing with a lot of problems that you weren't previously dealing with in a monolithic architecture, and you need some way to be able to control that complexity.
Yeah, and also one way, also you have to know what the problem is, exactly what the problem is, and that was like part of my issue, not completely, but part. And that's like what so now the thing is, you have to try different solutions to the same problem, just poke around, try different things. And then I think then you'll realize what exactly the problem is. And then you can take a step back and take a look at it and like, oh, okay, this is what I was doing wrong. So yes, even though microservices go micro, still you can make mistakes. And because not seeing the big picture. Sometimes you can't see the big picture. It depends, like on how convoluted the system is, and how the business rules and what is the request coming from the client, right?
Yeah, but what you're highlighting as well is that you can't rely on a human to look at all that stuff, right? So our QA guys are amazing. We're not talking about sort of your classic sort of button clickers here. Like these guys are on point, automation engineers, and they are concerned with making sure that that every code change you're able to see, what's happened over the course of the flow of the messages throughout the system. We're talking about they're making sure they're baselining, like benchmarking the performance with every change. To make sure that we're not increasing latency to our, because we're an API business, so latency is one of our key metrics there. We have to make sure that we're fast, or else what's the point of us existing in the first place, right? So the QA processes are really on point, and equally with like DevOps, we're as a development team, we're dealing with such complexity that we don't need to be thinking about what happens. How do we get things to dev and everything? So again, our DevOps guys are super talented, and they're able to put things together such that we push to our develop branch, and it goes off to our development environment, and then we're able to make sure that everything's okay. It goes through to QA and stuff, and then we press a button and it goes to prod, and all this can happen in the space of a day, sort of thing.
Okay, let's take a turn here. So we're coming up to an hour, so we should be closing it down slowly, but so it's a dynamic environment as far as I've seen it on your end. Do you guys take some time doing like research? Are you educating developers into new skills? Are you guys deciding the skills on the fly, or just stick with one technology like all the way through?
Yeah, we kind of at Koodoo, we're trying to build an environment that we want to work in, and that's one that is centered around constant progression, constant thirst for knowledge. We do a lot of POCs, and we're given time at work to be able to read up on things and make sure that we're using the best solutions. We do hackathons once a month where we just sort of like try and solve interesting problems within our domain, and see what we can come up with. And all these things help to create a really creative and innovative arena. I've worked with plenty of companies in the past that have been that have prided themselves on the fact that they say, "Oh, we're an innovative company. We really care about innovation." And the reality is they didn't do half of the things that we do at Koodoo now in terms of innovation. And the key there is that if you want to be an innovative company, then you have to invest in innovation. There's no other way to do it. You if you want to be innovative, you have to invest in innovation. Otherwise, you don't get it. Like it's the way it is.
Yeah, I don't know, the programming world is so dynamic. Every year there's something new,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you have always to keep on track with that,
Mm-hmm.
especially the front end part. Front end changes a lot, and that's because probably it's most visual, but still, you should never get comfortable with one technology, that's for sure, so that you always need to learn more and be you know interested in different technologies and different stuff. So, and step out of your shell. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
do something different. You'll look at your code differently and your preferred programming language differently.
Yeah, but as you said earlier, though, like it's important not to drink the Kool-Aid, though, right? Like in terms of just because something's a buzzword, you shouldn't be bringing it in. All the buzzwords that we use at Kudu, they've got reasons for being there. We have a problem that we're trying to solve, and that problem is solved by, well, maybe by a buzzword, right?
if buzzword solves your problem, it solves your problem.
Yeah,
But as long as you did the work to analyze that it solves your problem, then it's good.
absolutely.
As long as a lot of companies, what they do is just, at least what I kind of experienced, is that they grab the technology just because it's awesome, right?
It's
They
blockchain,
don't even
right?
put any. Yeah, it's blockchain. Like, put everything in blockchain. So, but I had that conversation recently, like, about blockchains, and like, okay, we need blockchains. Okay, how do we utilize blockchains? Well, I don't know. We need blockchains, but how are you going to use that? Like, we need to, if you have an idea with blockchains, like, yeah, but if you're just putting blockchains just because of the sake of blockchains, then it's like, it's not going to do anything good.
It's like, how do we use blockchains? Well, first, what we're going to do is send an email out to all our customers and tell them that we're using blockchains, and then profit, right?
Yeah, exactly. And a couple of talks, and then you'll be good to go.
Yeah.
Like, do we have a product? No, not yet, but we're talking about it. Like, pretty much. Like, so you're doing a lot of talks. I mean, you're busy at Koodoo. You're also having a Twitch stream at the same time. Um, how do you manage it? I mean, do you have any kind of special plan of organizing your time, or how do you organize yourself?
I read, John Sonmez. He's got that book, Soft Skills, the with through Manning Publishing. If you don't, that's fine. Essentially, there is a book called Soft Skills, and it's like a software developer's life manual or something. I think is the full title. It's written by a bloke named John Sonmez, and he is he's an evangelist for soft skills within developers, and he's got some really interesting ideas around the way in which software developers should should conduct themselves, and how do you be a professional, and how do you make sure that you look after your own interests in terms of career development and so forth. Anyway, his book suggested that that you should definitely have blogs and potentially podcasts and stuff like that. But the point is, you should be putting yourself out there in the software development community, because when your CV lands on someone's desk and they say, oh, Marco does the BackendBear podcast, I've listened to that quite a bit, and I'd be really excited to have him work for us, sort of thing. And you can build your own personal brand. And that led me to sort of chase. I went and I did a blog called The Reactionary. It had like a YouTube channel that led me to do a course on React, a video course with Manning Publishing. I can give you a discount code for that to put in your blog notes if you want.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, but in any case, that led me down a path where I spent a lot of my free time just doing that, and it made me not very happy because I was working all day, and then I was doing so much stuff at night, and like, I mean, I'm talking about like I was doing like 7 or 8 hours. Well, actually, no, that's an exaggeration. I was doing 4 or 5 hours after work every night, and then on the weekends I was doing 7 or 8 hours each day, to keep all that running. And eventually, I sort of burnt out, and then I started reeling it back, and I was like, well, I still want to be out there in the developer world, but how do I want to sort of be out there? And where I've landed is I write blog posts, I do my stream, I come on podcasts, and I do things that try and keep my visibility in the developer sort of world. But I don't let that. I mean, I've got two young kids and a wife, and so I need to spend quality time with them as well. And development is a passion of mine, but it's not. It shouldn't be overwhelming everything else. So I did need to reel that back a little bit. So in terms of how do I find the time, it feels easy to me because when you're going down a highway and you're doing like 70 mile an hour, and then you come back onto a residential street and it feels like you're crawling at 30 mile an hour.
Oh yeah.
And it's a similar sort of thing. Like if you go from 30 to 70, it seems like amazingly fast. Well, effectively, what I've done is I've gone from 30 to 70, and then I've reeled it back to 50 mile an hour. So I'm still like, I think it might seem, difficult to imagine how do I find the time for all this, but when you've come from 70 mile an hour, 50's kind of a little bit of a walk in the park,
So you're feeling uncomfortable, but you're not feeling like burned out, like or overworked, and you're not way too laid back.
I wouldn't describe it as uncomfortable. I think I'm feeling fulfilled. Like I think I think I'm doing enough work to make it feel like it's worthwhile. But I'm not doing it, so I'm not going to be the next Taylor Swift of development. You know what I mean? Yeah.
I knew you were trouble when you walked in. You started it. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
So, do you have any hobbies? Like, what do you do in your spare time? I mean, I unwind my own way. People already know about me, but what do you do, like, in your spare time?
I mean, other than do other things with computers, like your IoT episode inspired me to actually finally do something with my Raspberry Pi, other development related things. I also enjoy a beer, so socializing and so forth, and I guess an extension of socializing is I've been dungeon mastering D&D for the past sort of probably about 5 or 6 years at this point. So get some friends together and we talk about killing goblins. Like it's pretty fun.
Oh god, you open a can of worms with that one because in Serbia I have a dedicated group where we play D&D, right? And then I moved to the States recently, and I've been trying to find here, but I just can't find people to play with. Apparently, there's no like dedicated groups, or not in the time that I can, because I have a limited amount of time in a week and that I can play with. But what I always wanted to, and I was dungeon mastering, but I was playing. But one of my what I want to do in D&D is make a campaign for 5 bards, and it's a band.
That's amazing.
So and then every character, so you need 5 people that you would lead. So you're leading a band. Right? So it has to be 5 bards, and so every bard is now specialized in something different, but they're all bards.
Oh, that's amazing. Right?
So imagine 5 guys rolling for Anthem,
yeah. You could do something like do you know that video game Brutal Legend that's got Jack Black voicing the main character? Have you seen that one? Yeah, you could do a campaign. You could do a campaign like that, where it's just in a metal universe. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Yeah. Imagine or hair metal. That's hilarious. When you think about it, but that's what I wanted to do. And, that's pretty fun. So you mentioned 2 books, and I'm not gonna question you any more books because this is one is the Tower of Microservices, and the other one is soft skill book, Software Developers Handbook. I don't know if I wrote it down correctly, but so what is, from your perspective, what is the last thing you learned? It doesn't have to be programming related, but what do you can you remember the last thing that you kind of learned?
I played around with some Vim color schemes recently. I use Vim in my day to day, and so that's a constant learning curve. You're always trying to find something that makes your development environment slightly more you and slightly more amazing. And so there was an auto completion library and a color scheme that I've been playing around with in Vim. In terms of, I guess real development stuff, I picked up Kafka. Been recommended that by a number of developer friends of mine whenever I've been talking about our system. Currently, we use Nats as a message broker, I've been told that Kafka is really quite something to behold. So I've been learning about that, and I have to agree, it's a really cool piece of tech that we're hopefully going to shove under the molecular framework that we have, and get that running.
Well, that's great.
Mm.
So something, can you share something that happened to you like outside the world of programming and that you would like to share? So something completely unrelated to programming, or I don't know. It can be anything. Happen going out to the park with the kids. I mean, even that, like, so something. What to you is like something that you would like to share that's outside the world of programming?
Slipknot announced the European tour today, and I'm so stoked. And they're going to be playing. They announced that they're going to be playing in my town in Nottingham, and so I'm going to organise for me and my wife to go and see them, because we're both from the new metal era, and so it's going to be quite a fun trip down memory lane, as far as I can see.
Oh, a fellow nodder. So
Yeah, man.
yeah, I love Slipknot also.
Yeah.
Or a fellow maggot.
Yeah.
So yeah, and we're basically at the end, but where can people find you? Can you plug in like any locations, links, sites, anything that you would like people to know where they can find you?
Sure. I spend too much time on Twitter. I'm at Zac the Hacker.
I testify to that.
And other than that, I write blog posts on Medium. Although I might be moving to Dev 2 soon, because I'm sick of having my stuff paywalled. But yeah, that's pretty much me. I think probably Twitter's probably the easiest to be able to catch me. Oh, the other place that I'm at is I'm on Coding Coach. So I think the link for that, I'll give you the link after we've done the interview, so you can make sure you get the correct one. But I think it's codingcoach.io, and it's a website that's been set up by a community of people, and the idea is that it's hooking up mentors with mentees. So people who have some experience try to share their experience with people who are trying things for the first time, and so I'm a mentor on that, it's all free. There's no profit behind it. It's just developers trying to do good by other developers. So I'm on that too.
That's really interesting. I mean, I'm even interested in that. So and people should definitely check that out. And I would love to put in the show notes. So when we are sure about the links. So,
Yeah.
But definitely. But yeah, I mean, Zac, man, thank you for being on the show. Like it was great having you. It was a great conversation. For me, it was a complete eye opener. So I thank you for that. And I'm definitely gonna approach like microservices differently now. Not tomorrow, but maybe even tomorrow. But when I get back to work on Monday, so definitely I have a fresh pair of eyes on that topic, and that kind of helped me a lot. And I hope it helped you people as well, listeners, because this is a great thing.
Hey, that's great, man. Thanks so much for having me. It's I agree. It was a blast to have a chat.
And that's it. We're at the end. Thank you for staying this long and enjoying the show. I hope you found it useful, and I really hope you liked it. Zac is a very intelligent guy to talk to. I learned a lot from him. I mean, the next day I went to work, I was blasting through the microservices. So really, Zac, thank you. Thank you for everything you taught me just in that one episode. And I hope you guys learned as well. And you can find Zac on Twitter as Zacker the Hacker. Also, we forgot to mention that he has a Twitch channel, and he streams every once in a while, and it's called Tinfoil Saint. It's on twitchtv.com. He also has a Medium profile, medium.com, and then /@Zacker the Hacker, which you can also check out. Also, you can find one of his publications, React in Motion, a test-driven approach, on manning.com. And if you use the promo code YTBrady, or Let me repeat again, YTBRADDY. You'll get a 40% promo code. So definitely check it out. Thank you for listening to an episode of BackendBear Podcast. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at BackendBear and on Facebook at BackendBear Podcast. If you have any questions or concerns, feel free to send them via Twitter or just email me at marco@backendbear.com. Any other information or anything that you would like to know, it can be found at backendbear.com. Thank you again, and until next time, ta-da!